It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
So let's kind of do a deeper dive into the basics.
So we're going to talk about the different types of Roth and the different ways that you can get money into Roth assets. And the first one is probably the one that we are all mostly familiar with. It is the Roth IRA. And when we say IRA, that just stands for Individual Retirement Account. It's the thing that when you were young, if you had an older person in your life who was trying to tell you how to start making good financial decisions, they probably started beating you over the head with open a Roth IRA and start putting money in a Roth IRA. This is the account they were talking about.
Yeah, and remember, Roth IRAs have only been around since 1997, 1998. 97 was the legislation. 98 was the first year you could contribute. Before that, there was traditional IRAs. So a lot of you are probably going, well, what's the difference between Roth and traditional?
Yep. So we actually wanted to lay them out in a T-chart. Again, if you're listening out on iTunes, you should check this out. But here's kind of the differences. When it comes to contributions that go into a traditional or pre-tax IRA are not taxed. It's pre-tax money going in. Contributions into a Roth IRA are after tax. It's money that comes to you in your paycheck after tax have been withheld. There is not a present year tax benefit to those contributions.
And by the way, traditional IRAs can come in several different forms. Sure. You can have what Bo just described was a contributory traditional IRA. That's where you're putting in, originally it was like $2,000 a year. Now that number is $6,000 a year. You may or may not get a tax deduction as you contribute, depending upon your income, if you have access to a retirement plan. There's also a SEP IRA. If you have self-employment income, if you work for a small business, there's a chance that your employer is contributing to a SEP IRA for your benefit. As that company grows, you might have a simple IRA. You don't see these as often as when I kind of set one up for my first company in the mid-2000s. Now we have solo 401ks and other things. But simple IRAs let you have smaller contributions than a 401k, but they kind of work very similar. They're simple employer-provided plans where it lets the employees contribute, but also the employer contributes as well.
Super easy to implement.
And then the last one, and this is after you've had a few years of work and you start changing jobs and other things, your 401k assets at an old employer, you might roll it over into what's called a rollover IRA. That's a good landing place for those qualified assets. Those are all the different places that you can kind of open traditional IRAs.
So once you have the money in the account, the actual behavior is relatively similar while they're growing. Both accounts, a traditional IRA and a Roth IRA, grow tax deferred, meaning as income is paid out in the account or as capital appreciation happens in the investments, you don't have to pay taxes as the accounts are growing. Both of them grow tax deferred. But at the end of the growth period is when it gets exciting, because when you pull money out of your traditional IRA, or out of your SEP IRA, or out of your simple IRA, or out of your IRA rollover, you have to pay ordinary income taxes on that money. You got a tax benefit on the front end, but you don't get it on the back end. You actually have to pay the taxes. With a Roth IRA, if you pull the money out and it's a qualified distribution, all of that growth turns out to be entirely tax-free.
And that's the secret sauce.
That's
what gets people excited, because realize ordinary income taxes are the highest rates you pay. It's not the tax favored stuff like capital gains are or dividends. You're paying at the marginal rates just like if it was employment income.
And a lot of folks are asking the question, okay, what does it mean to be a qualified distribution? There are really two things that you have to do. You have to be over the age of 59 and a half, and you have to make sure that the account was established for at least the 5 years. Now, there is one caveat. We already mentioned this. Roth IRA does have an extra benefit that the traditional IRA doesn't, in that you can always get to your contributions penalty-free and tax-free, but you never, ever want to do that for the exact reason we showed that Brian felt like he made a mistake. He didn't max out. If you pull those contributions out, it's not like you can go back in time and put them back. So you want to make sure you don't access that unless you have to.
So the tax-free growth gets everybody so excited. What are the downsides? There has to be some downsides to these Roth assets because it can't be rainbows and unicorns all the time. So what are the limitations or constraints of these things?
Yeah, so there are some unique constraints that exist specifically in Roth IRAs. The first is that there is no current year tax benefit. So if you're trying to contribute to a Roth as a means to decrease your tax bill this year, it won't work. It won't happen. The other thing is that the IRS is pretty specific that only certain types of folks should be able to contribute to a Roth IRA. So there are income limits. The first thing is you have to have earned income, and you have to earn some sort of income. You can't be retired, or you can't fund it for a child who's not filing an income tax return. You have to have earned income. But once you do have that earned income, it can't be over a certain level. In 2021, the limits for where the phase out of Roth IRA contributions begin, for single folks, it's $125,000. And then for married filing jointly folks, it starts at $198,000. So if you are at that level or above, you're going to be limited in what you're able to put into a Roth IRA.
By the way, I think it's worth noting when Bo says earned income, we're talking about basically wages, self-employment income. It's not money that you made through your investments. It's actually money that you had to go earn, exactly like the name implies.
That's right.
So it is basically wages, self-employment income, things like that. Anything that's going to be subject to Social Security and Medicare tax. By the way, here's another restriction. This thing is so good, they limit how much you can contribute each year. And that's
exactly
something
right.
you need to pay attention to. So with a Roth IRA, that number is $6,000 per year in 2021. Now, it is indexed for inflation, and I'm getting close. This is about the only thing I can look forward to when I do cross over into my 50s, is I will get an additional $1,000 a year annual catch-up contribution.
Now, some people ask me this question. Okay, hey, I didn't fund my Roth last year, the year before. Do I get to go back and make it up? Like if I didn't do it in 2019 or 2020 or 2018, can I catch up for that? No, you cannot. So one of the reasons why we tell you is get on the Roth train as early as you can is because you are limited over your working career how many dollars you can get into that Roth bucket. So you want to take advantage of it as early as you can.
Now, the good news is you have until April to fund even a contribution for a prior year. So if you're watching this, because we are recording this show in February, we can go back in time to a degree and fund a Roth IRA for last year. So take advantage of those things because that is an opportunity. So here's the next question. We've got you excited. Now you're saying, well, who should go for the Roth IRA? I mean, who is this thing really focused on? And we put together some thought patterns for you.
There's a few traits that if you are a younger individual, why does youth matter? Because you have a lot of time for those Roth assets to compound tax-free. So if you're young, Roth might be a good option. If you have earned income, Roth might be a good option. And if you're under the income threshold, Roth might be a good option. So if you fit these three categories, there's a really good chance that you should consider contributing to a Roth IRA directly.
Pretty much anybody that's under that income threshold. I mean, look, I know we have Are You Young on there, but guys, the older I get, the younger everybody else seems. I mean, it really is a thing where I think as long as you're under that basic income threshold, funding a Roth IRA is a good thing for your future because there's even some estate benefits or legacy benefits long term. So definitely take advantage of the Roth IRA. It's a powerful tool in your financial independence.
Okay, so if I want to open up a Roth IRA and I want to start investing, are there different types of investments that I should house inside of my Roth? Are there things that make more sense to hold in a Roth as opposed to not holding a Roth?
Well, I'm always going to give the basics first before we start getting cute with this thing, is because I think every dollar has so much potential. I want you to be a good field general who's disciplined, who knows what to do with your money, so not a dollar is wasted, especially in your Roth accounts. So here's what I'd recommend. Don't outsmart yourself. Figure out how much you can save and when you need it, and then use that knowledge to go invest in an indexed target retirement fund.
Love it.
Because that's going to really, it's going to take a lot of the decision-making out of it. It's going to let you focus on the behavior of saving. And guess what? If you're in your 20s and you're choosing an indexed target retirement fund that's 40 years in the future, it's going to be aggressive. But as you get closer to retirement, it's going to get more conservative. So it takes a lot of that guesswork out. I do think the mistake I see, and Laura, look, we've talked about it. It seems like 2020 and 2021, and maybe it's because we're all locked up from the pandemic, it has been the year of speculation.
Oh, man, no kidding.
I mean, when we're talking about Bitcoin, we're talking about the growth of Tesla, everybody daydreams that man, this is the way I want to do it, is I'm going to go speculate, maybe even go buy your GameStop or your AMC and your Roth IRA. There's a big caveat to doing that, and that is the fact that contributions and then investments in your Roth accounts, if you lose money, now look, the gain is tax-free. Those losses don't offer you any tax benefit.
None.
You just absorb those losses. So you should be aware. I always like to remember the whole analogy that this is like playing horseshoes versus trying to hit a hole in one on golf. You know, that's what I would focus on, is that how can I maximize the growth? And the way to do that is focus on that index target retirement fund, and it's going to really take a lot of those mistakes away from you.
Don't make it harder than it has to be. All right, so the second way that we might see Roth is maybe you're listening to the show and you remember that you recently went through open enrollment for your retirement account. And you remember when it was time to select how you want to contribute to your 401k, there were two options. You had the regular pre-tax option in your 401k, but then you saw this Roth 401k option, and it is exactly what it sounds like. You can make the election that when you put money into your 401k, you can choose for it to go into the Roth tax-free bucket as opposed to the pre-tax traditional bucket.
So this is pretty cool because, look, and this is improving every year. We have found from our research 70% of employers' 401k plans, their employer retirement plans, do offer Roth contributions.
Yep.
So that's the glass half full. It is sad that there's still 30%. And I've seen it sometimes in our comments section on YouTube. There are a few of you that 30% do not have access to Roth contributions. I would really encourage you, use that data that it's a 70-30 game now to go lobby your HR, lobby your boss. Hey, why don't we modernize the retirement plan so we can take advantage of some of these cool things? It's just a matter of amending the plan document and making this available to the employees.
What I think is remarkable is we help a number of 401k plan sponsors design and manage 401k plans for their employees. It doesn't actually cost any additional money to make the Roth option available. It literally is just checking a box. So don't think just because you don't have it, you cannot incite that change. It's something you should definitely try to influence if you have the ability to.
So now we're probably, because look, this is where it gets a little more detailed, a little nuanced.
Sure.
In the fact that we've got Roth IRAs. Now you're telling me we can have Roth employer plans like a Roth 401k, a Roth 403b. What's the difference? Give me a layout here.
So there's a few, both of them are tax-free. That's the big thing. You don't get a current year tax benefit when you put it in, but the money grows, and if it's qualified when you pull it out, it's tax-free. But there are some differences you should be aware of, because if you're following the financial order of operations, you have a question. Okay, do I do a Roth IRA or do I do a Roth 401k? Well, you want to know these differences. The first is, one of the beautiful things about Roth IRAs is there are no required minimum distributions when you get to age 72. That's different than a traditional IRA or an IRA rollover. However, if you are in the Roth 401k, because it is still inside of that 401k structure, there is a chance that you are going to have to pull out required minimum distributions starting at age 72. So if you are someone who's 70, 71, approaching that age, and you still have money sitting in an old 401k and it's in the Roth bucket, you may want to consider getting that into a Roth IRA so that you can avoid those RMDs.
The other big benefit is, and you guys have probably caught on to this, you don't have as much control on the investment options.
Right.
Now, a lot of you guys, if you work for a large company that's working with the Fidelities, the Vanguards of the world, you're pretty happy with your 401k investment choices. But there's a lot of small businesses that don't necessarily have the greatest investment choices in their retirement plans. You're kind of at the mercy of whoever your employer chose to partner with for the employer plan. Whereas if you're setting up the Roth IRA for yourself, you can go choose one of the low cost providers. So you have a lot more control on the IRA side. I'm just hopeful that maybe you're on the good side of the employer plan, but that's not always the case.
The other thing that's a little unique about Roth 401ks that make them really, really exciting is we've already mentioned that in order to even be able to put money into a Roth IRA, your income has to fall below a certain threshold to be able to make those direct contributions. With a Roth 401k, there is no income limit. So you could make $1 million a year and still choose to have your salary deferral contributions go into the Roth 401k. So if your plan makes it available, there are no income constraints. It opens it up to everybody, no matter how high your income is.
Now, I do want to make a clarification here. A lot of people, you'll get surprised by this. You'll say, I'm making the decision, my salary deferrals, my personal savings, and my employer plan. I'm going to do Roth. And then you're shocked to find out that when you get your 401k statement, all of your employer contributions are not Roth. They're actually pre-tax. And there's a reason for that. Realize your employer, not only are they trying to be generous, they're also taking a tax deduction when they fund your matching contributions, your profit sharing contributions. The government says if you're going to take a deduction, we're going to make it be tax deferred, not Roth. Because remember, when you fund all these salary deferrals into the Roth account, you don't get a current year tax deduction. So that's what, it's perfectly fine. Your administrator, your custodian, they're going to keep up with the different buckets. You don't have to worry about it. I just want to make you aware. Employer money is always going to be pre-tax. You have the choice with your contributions, whether it's going to be pre-tax traditional or tax-free Roth.
So that's a great point that you make there, Brian. And one of the questions we get all the time is, okay, I heard you guys. I hear you loud and clear. I love the idea of having this tax-free Roth money. So does that mean that if I log into my 401k account and I see that I have a Roth 401k option, no matter what, I should put money into the Roth 401k because that's always what's going to make the most sense for me? Or are there times that it makes sense to put money into the pre-tax 401k as opposed to the Roth 401k?
Well, you definitely, I think there's several things you have to think about as you're making this decision. First of all, let's ask yourself, do you think tax rates are going up in the long term? The second thing, do you think even if tax rates are going up, maybe you're in a high income tax situation right now, you're paying a very high marginal tax rate. I'm talking about if you add your income taxes federally plus the state income tax, you're like, holy cow, I pay above 30%.
Above 30, yeah.
You're kind of panicking about that. And you're like, but it's okay. When I retire, I'm pretty sure I won't have all this earned income. I'm going to be in a much lower tax bucket, in a tax bracket in the future. That if you have that feeling, I can understand. And that's what we talk about, 25% and lower on your combined tax rate. Do Roth. It's just a no-brainer. That's a good historical rate. Even if you think income's going to be lower in retirement, that's historically pretty low. 25 to 30%, you're kind of in that gray zone. It all depends on your outlook, your specific situation. It's the people that are in the higher tax brackets, meaning 30% and greater, and you think that your income will be lower in retirement, or you think you can legally manipulate your tax code in retirement because you're using the bucket strategy, then you might want to do traditional.
Yep.
As much as we love Roth, you might want to see if there's going to be a Roth conversion opportunity, especially my fire folks. You might have the potential to manipulate the tax code if you're retiring in your 50s. That's something to take into account.